agriculture innovation that's happening in the Madison area and returned to Kentucky to start a farm. She and her husband, Steve, started Rains and Sun Hilltop Farm in Independence, Kentucky in 2013. And this 13-acre farm is heavily focused on community-supported agriculture, along with 2 local farmers markets, and became certified organic this year. Yay. All right, Anna, I'm gonna stop my screen share here and let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brooke, and all of the Oak team. This has been an awesome conference so far, and I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some of what we're doing, and hopefully that will help some of you and give you some ideas. So let me get my screen sharing going here. All righty. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about crop planning for the small to medium CSA. And thank you so much. Oh, sorry. I wanted to first just tell a little bit about our farm origin story. I just always think it's interesting to hear how people came to farming, and just, you know, sort of what inspired them. And Brooke mentioned this a little bit to start with. So my husband and I met in grad school in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was studying nutritional science. He was studying plant breeding. And you know what, I'm realizing that my video is maybe not on, which let's see if we can do that. Okay. So that looks good.
Hey, Anna, this is Jenny. Your bandwidth is a little low, so your video might be competing with your slides, just to let you know.
Okay, so I just started the video, and now is that?
Keep going and we'll try it out, but
okay.
You may have to turn off your lovely face just so we can focus on your content, and then we'll get back to you at the Q&A if we need to.
Okay, yeah, just let me know. All right. All right, there we go. So anyway, we got inspired by all of the awesome agriculture that was going on up in Madison, Wisconsin. There are lots of small CSA farms. There's a huge CSA coalition up there. And we just thought that was really amazing. So I grew up in Northern Kentucky, and when we finished school, we decided to come back here and start a farm of our own. We found a property in late 2012 and then started growing in 2013. Starting with just 10 CSA shares that were mostly just family and friends. And really, that's kind of a nice way to do it with people that you know like that. We grew really slowly. We kind of knew that we wanted to grow slowly because when we started our CSA, we had a 3-year-old, and then we had another kid in 2013 and another kid in 2015. So the vegetable growing part of the operation had to grow slowly since we had family stuff going on too. So that was kind of the way we went about it. People make different choices, but that's how we did. And so we gradually ramped up. And then last year we produced for 68 CSA shares and 2 farmers markets. And I also had 4 employees, one of which was kind of full-time for most of the year. The others were part-time, different parts of the year. So that's kind of where we are and where we have been. We knew initially that we really wanted to focus on CSA. We had been inspired and had been members of a CSA when we lived in Madison. And there are lots of benefits of CSA, as you guys probably know. One thing is it evens out your cash flow because you're getting payments for shares early in the year when you have to buy a lot of the stuff, the seeds and the supplies and everything. And so that really helps out to have cash for that. The other thing that's great is it gives you confidence in crop planning. I think a lot of people feel really intimidated by CSA because of how much planning goes into it. But when you know how many shares you're going to produce for, that really can give you some confidence in how much do you need to produce. If you're just going to market and you're not really sure how much people are going to buy, you might be left like growing a whole bunch of stuff that nobody wants. And then that's not good for anyone. So that's really helpful, I think. And then the third thing is forming strong relationships with your best customers. So the people that become CSA members from your of your farm are really going to be your absolute best customers and best supporters if you do it right. And I think that feeling of being a member and being a part of something bigger, that's really like part of the value of CSA for the people that join and for you too, because they sort of become an extended part of your family. And they can do your marketing for you in a lot of cases because they spread the word about your farm. So that's awesome. So those are the good things. Of course, there are challenges. This is my middle child, who's also a challenge sometimes. So planning, like I mentioned, and what this whole talk is about, is a challenge for a lot of people. There's a ton that goes into planning, but you're choosing which crops and when you want to plant them. So figuring out when that needs to happen to have a good supply of the crops throughout the season. So that's key. And then we'll talk about like deciding how long you want your season to be and all that sort of stuff. Then there's a whole nother piece of logistics, because you're not just bringing the vegetables to market, you are packing them into shares. So how is that going to look? What kinds of pickup situation are you going to have? Are you going to offer home delivery? Are you going to allow people to customize their shares, or is it just going to be something you set? So there's a lot that goes into that logistics piece as well. And then the piece that probably nobody really enjoys very much, the data management piece. I don't mind data management, and I did a lot of work with spreadsheets when I was in grad school, so maybe that's part of it, but it's also not like a joyful piece to me either. But it is a necessary piece that you have to make time for. And really, I think, you know, not just CSA farmers, all farmers can benefit from some of the management that you have to do and the planning. But with CSA, there is this added piece of keeping track of all of your members and whether they've paid and how, if they're paying in installments, and what their address is, you know, just all these little pieces that you need to keep track of for your members. So when Jenny originally asked me to do this talk, I was calling it crop planning for the small to medium CSA. But then as I started to put it together, I realized that I kind of wanted to talk about a lot of different aspects of planning. Crop planning, of course, is a big piece of what you need to do, but to have a successful CSA, there's a lot more that goes into it as well. So I started thinking of a lot of the different things that I think are important to consider. And so I've got budget and crop selection, planting for shares, and succession planting, the season length and share types, how to build your CSA boxes, whether you're going to offer traditional or customizable shares or both, what kind of share pickup and delivery situation are you going to have? Are you going to use any CSA management tools like software to help you? And then how do you plan for sustainable growth of your farm, including CSA member agreements? And there's lots more, I'm sure. I was kind of curious. So when you look at this list, if you're either a current CSA farmer or if you are somebody who wants to start a CSA, what are the kinds of things that you're most concerned about or you think will be the most difficult? If you want to type that into the chat, so people can kind of look and see. And I guess I'm realizing that I maybe can't see the chat when I'm sharing my full screen.
That's correct. You cannot see the chat. Yeah. So when we get enough responses through, I'll sort of summarize and share them with you. They're coming in. We have a few in here: customizable shares, finding your first customers, crop and succession planning is most daunting, succession planning and budgeting, record keeping, delivery. How do you find time to leave the farm? That's the truth, right?
That's a good one that I didn't put on.
And I think particularly if folks are getting started, those first customers, how do you find your first customers?
Yes.
So that's the first batch of responses. There are no more coming through right now, so I'll stop talking.
But yeah, so that's kind of, those responses were across the board with the different things we have going on. But yeah, so things that I didn't think about putting up here, which are really good to think about for your first customers. I mean, what we did was just to put it out to friends and family initially. And I think that can be really useful. If you're in an area where you don't know as many people, that can be harder. But I think if you're on social media, you can try to put it out that way. And then hopefully, word of mouth gets going, and then that will go. But yeah, it sounds good that people have interest in the spectrum of what I've got up here. So hopefully you'll find some useful info on what we're going to talk about. So we'll move on. So the kind of boring piece, I guess, but also really important and good to prioritize is thinking about your budget for your farm. So actually, one of the awesome things about CSA is that it can help with your budget planning. Because when you are thinking about, if you're going to primarily be doing CSA, you're going to set your share price and you're going to set the number of shares you want to commit to. And so already, just by multiplying those two things together, you know how much money you want your farm to bring in for the year. So that can really, really help out a lot and make it, less of a black box. However, figuring out what you're going to charge for your share, what a fair price is not always so easy. There's a lot of things to consider there. I think what most farmers have come to these days that I've seen is pricing their share based on the value, the market price of the items within the share. So maybe you go to farmers market also, maybe you don't. If you do and you know what your prices are at market, then using those same prices to fill out your share can be useful. One caveat to that is a lot of times in the early spring shares, the value of your share is going to be maybe like less than your average price. And then in the summer, it's maybe a little bit more. And I think that can still work out really well for most farms. Or if you're just beginning, you could just do your shares in the main part of the season where you have plenty of stuff and the value is high enough. So of course, when you're thinking about budget, also like what do you have other outlets for your produce? And then thinking about your projected expenses. If you're just getting started, those might be significant as you start to accumulate the tools and big equipment and things that you will need to do the farming. And some of those things, maybe, you're not paying for all of it right away or whatever, but just trying to look at, what your gross income is going to be, what those expenses are going to be, and is this going to leave enough profit to meet your farm's financial goals? And can you tweak the number of shares you're going to do in order to get there with whatever goals you have? So that's kind of what we think about there for getting started. And that really does help organize your downstream planning if you get that budget together. It's not like what you're going to, when you look at the end of the year, it's going to completely match this, but it just helps you start and figure out where you're going. Okay. So then you want to think about the crops that you are going to be planting. And if you are a CSA farmer, you want to be planting a big variety of crops. But at the same time, you want to focus on the things that people really like. So like I say here, you want to focus on things that are popular. This is at least, what I think about for the kind of shares that we do. And that's tomatoes, of course, always. Lots of lettuce. Things like carrots are always super popular. Onions are something that's not always a super profitable thing to grow, but I think is really, really important in CSA shares, because you want to make sure that people are getting items that they can actually make a meal out of. And I don't know about you guys, but all of our meals start with some kind of onion or garlic, some kind of allium thing. So I think it's really important to me to be giving those things almost every week, because people use that stuff. Cucumbers are also a big one, but unfortunately, those are hard to produce for a long period of time, just because there's so much disease pressure. But yeah, so really think about meals and cooking when you're selecting your crops. And just because I said focus on popular crops doesn't mean to not include a wide variety. But I have found over the years that there are certain things which might be really easy to grow, like Asian greens is an example. But CSA members don't really appreciate getting tons and tons and tons of Asian greens. You can definitely do it here and there, but too much can be a problem, because there are really just some things that people want, a couple times during the season. And there's other things that they would want almost every week if you could possibly do that. I also think you should consider your region, your growing region, of course. So there are certain things that can grow really well around here, and there's other things that don't do well. So one thing, for instance, on our farm that I would love to grow more of because people love it, it's also, well, it's not that profitable either. So broccoli is what I'm thinking of. Broccoli just doesn't really grow that well here. I mean, occasionally you have a good year for broccoli, but it's just not that great. So that's one of those things I keep including in my crop plan, and we do give it a little bit in the spring, but I've sort of tried to minimize that, because I've just realized it doesn't grow that well here. So I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall sometimes. And then the other thing to think about is whether there is a niche for your farm. So I think in most of Kentucky, we are really not saturated with CSA. Like, we could use a lot more CSA farmers for the population that we have. But there are some areas and more urban areas and where there are a lot of CSA farms that already exist. And if you are in an area like this, you could maybe consider whether there's a particular niche that your CSA could fill. So maybe there's a lot of really standard CSAs, like ours is more standard, but you could do like a CSA that is tailored to gourmet chefs that want lots of more unusual things. Or you could do a CSA that was really focused just on raw salad crops. And maybe that would be of interest to certain people. You could also focus on doing like an out of season CSA, like a fall winter CSA, which requires a different kind of planning. But that could be useful in some spots. All right, so planting for shares and then succession planting. Okay, so it's really important to do some market research when you're beginning CSA. You know, I don't think we didn't really do this when we first started CSA, but we did start to survey our members after the season. And I always think this, you know, people tell you to do this, but it feels, you can feel really vulnerable sometimes after a season when you're asking people, you know, like whether they liked it or not. But it is just so important to do that, because then you get some information that can help you plan the following year. And you just continually get better and better at giving your customers what they really want, instead of just growing what you like to grow, but may not be what people want to eat. And so one of the things we did was to ask members how often they would like to receive certain crops. And that's where we found out, people really want to get tomatoes and lettuce often. And that's maybe something you don't need to survey a group of people. Most people are going to say stuff like that. But then other things where, like radishes, for instance, maybe you think like, oh yeah, everybody really loves radishes. But then you do your survey and find out, well, maybe only like a third of people really like radishes, and most people don't want to get them that often. So that can help you with planning. Especially this is important if you are doing a traditional type share where you are choosing what's in the share and people can't substitute anything. So you want to try to get as close as you can to kind of what the average person would like. And then thinking about planning, you want to use, if you're just starting out and you don't have any yield data from your own farm, you want to try to get some kind of average yield data to help you initially plan. And this is a little bit difficult because when you start looking, there's lots of different data out there. But really, I wouldn't worry too much about it because these are all averages. Everything is going to be slightly different just depending on your soil, depending on your weed pressure, depending on just how much rain we get, and insect pressure, all sorts of things. But looking those things up can help. And when we initially were starting out and looking at that stuff, I think we used some of J.M. Fortier's yield data in the Market Gardener book, and that was useful. But of course, it was like our numbers didn't match up to the yields that he was getting. So some kind of fudge factor in there can really be helpful. Also, when we initially started our CSA, it was small and we didn't have other market outlets. We just did CSA for the first 2 years. And then we started going to market in 2015. But I do think that having another market outlet is nice, because then you overplant what you think you'll need for your CSA, and you can sell the extra at market. So that was really our market strategy to start with, was just to sell extra from CSA. I don't think that's the best market strategy. It's good to actually plan to plant things for market too, that you'll sell a lot of. But that can help when you're starting out to have another outlet. Because there's a tendency for starting CSA farmers to give too much in their shares. And believe it or not, that is the biggest complaint of CSA members, is getting too much and wasting food. So you think you're, giving them a lot of value by giving them all of this stuff, when in reality, they're upset because they paid good money for this beautiful organic produce and then they had to throw it away. So people really get sad about that. And that's a big reason why people don't return the following year to CSA. So that's a really important thing to not do, is not give too much. Another thing to consider when you're planning for your shares is and especially in succession planting. So for instance, with lettuce, we grow a lot of lettuce. I think most market gardeners should grow a lot of lettuce because it sells well. And we can outcompete with freshness from the California farms. So for instance, with something like lettuce, you need to plan for the growth acceleration that happens in the spring and then the slowdown that happens in the fall. So what that means practically is that in the spring, you'll space your plantings out further apart because everything is starting to catch up. And then in the fall, you'll squish them closer together. So you might plant your lettuce 2 weeks apart, but then when you're harvesting, they'll only be a week apart in harvest. Figuring that out is really, I think, a learning curve that we are still on. And as much as you plan for those things, sometimes, you know, the weather will get in the way of when you can actually plant something. So you just do your best, and you do end up with a little bit too much in the spring, and hopefully you get what you need in the fall. But just something to consider as you're at least making your idealized plan. Okay. So now I'm going to show you the spreadsheet that I like to use to help plan my season. And it's similar to other things that you've probably seen before. So
Hey, Anna, you might have to turn off your video again. Your voice is getting a little warbly.
Hey, Anna, your voice is getting a little warbly.
It says my video's off, but can you still see me?
We cannot see you, but we can see your
When I
spreadsheet.
click on it, it says I have to start. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so can you hear me good? All right, hopefully. Okay. All right, so this is the spreadsheet that I use to plan my season. So there's lots of great things about spreadsheets. Maybe you guys already know a lot of this stuff. One of the things that I love is that you can sort by lots of different things. Right now, I have it sorted alphabetically based on crop. So the information that I include in here is what crop I'm planting, the cultivar. I have different rotation groups that I use. We don't do a really complicated rotation. We just put like lots of different greens things together, legumes, brassicas, cucurbits, solanaceas mostly in the hoop houses. And yeah, that's really it. So, and we just alternate with greens and heavier feeders like the brassicas and cucurbits. So that's kind of how we do, and it works out pretty well. I haven't really used this much. This was something that I had gotten from something JM Fortier was doing, this crop code. It can be useful, especially if you're starting out and not planting a full row of something, to have this crop code where different crops that have the same requirements, like they're in the ground for about the same amount of time, they either need row cover or shade cloth or some other like treatment that you do. So if they all kind of need the same thing and they're in there about the same amount of time, you might give them a similar crop code. So most of these are not that interesting, but I had come up with this crop code where it was going to be like fennel, celery, chard, and parsley. So those were kind of all similar requirements, and it seemed like a good idea to put those together. And then like mustards, for instance, is another crop group where you've got turnips and radishes and arugula and Asian greens and those kinds of things. So that can be useful. Then I've got two numbers in here. I've got the days to harvest from transplant. So once you put a plug in the ground, how long is it going to take to harvest that crop? And then also the days in flats. So, you know, a lot of times that's 4 or 5 weeks. It's for some things like celery, it can be a lot longer than that. And that's the kind of information you can usually look up. But then to get this days to harvest from transplant, that you kind of have to fudge a little bit, because most seed packets, for instance, just tell you a date to maturity. So then you're kind of figuring out, well, how much am I, then they say subtract, 14 days or something if you're transplanting. Okay. So we need these two numbers though, because then you get to the date information. So what I like to do, so here I've got a number of beet successions here. I like to say, when do I want to have my first planting ready? And here I've got May 1st, which was super optimistic. And I don't think I made that date. But anyway, this is an example. So I've got my ready date. That's when I'd like to have this crop ready. And then in order to get my seeding date for when I need to seed it into flats, I will subtract out how many days in flats and how many days from harvest to transplant. So like add those two things together and subtract it from when I need it to be ready. And in spreadsheets, it will just do that for you and you get, a date there. So that's really useful. And then you can get the transplant date just by adding the seeding date to the number of days in flats, and you get your transplant date. I also plan, how many bed feet do I want of this crop? And that's where, you're getting into your yield data to try to figure out, how many shares am I producing? How many pounds or bunches do I want of this item? And then you figure out how many bed feet you're going to plant. I also put what my spacing is going to be and the number of rows I'm going to have in my beds, because I can use that information. And then the flat type that I'm going to have, which here I was thinking about doing these in paper pots and I didn't end up doing that last year. So let's just hop down to broccoli here that we do in 72 cell flats. And then you can, by knowing how many bed feet you have, what your row spacing is, how many inches apart, and your number of rows, you can figure out how many flats you need. And this is a little bit of a complicated equation. But really it's just multiplying the number of bed feet you have by inches, and then dividing that by your in-row spacing, multiplying by how many rows you have, and then dividing by how many cells are in a flat. So hopefully that makes some sense. And then of course, I'm not going to do 5.6 flats. I'm going to round that up to 6, which is good anyway, because it's good to have extra plants just in case some of them don't turn out very well. So that's really great. It's nice to be able to seed or to sort by your crop, because then when you're doing a lot of successions, like for instance, I'll go down to, lettuce. Here we do tons of successions of lettuce. And so I know I want to have it ready every week. And so I just, put every single week, I'm going to have it ready starting in June, the summer lettuce that we do. And it's really easy to just put that in and have your information in here that way. The other nice thing to do, of course, is then to sort by your seeding date, so you can make a nice little seeding calendar. So you just select it all and sort it. By your seeding date. It'll do it. All right, and then so that tells me that, and this was last year's, and that gives me, when I'm starting to seed, and so then I can put that on my calendar for these various crops. So we try to transplant as much as possible, which everyone should do if they can, because you just stay ahead of the weeds and all sorts of things. The only thing that's different, I do have things that we direct seed. It's a little bit simpler here. All you need to have here is the days to harvest from germination. And then also importantly, the days.
Anna, are you there? We lost your audio. Can you hear us?
will just be the harvest date minus the days to harvest from germination and the days to germinate. All right, so that is that. And I know that's a ton of information. And this is just how we do it, and it's not how you have to do it, but I've found it to be pretty useful. I like to then combine my direct seeding and my transplant data together into one thing so that I can see, you know, when everything needs to either be seeded or go into the ground. And then the really key thing after that is to make sure that what you put in your spreadsheet is actually going to work in the field area that you have. Should I start my video again, or is it better if I don't because of the...
I think for now, don't. Your audio cut out again. So let's leave the video for the Q&A.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so then once you've got some planning done in your spreadsheets, what you want to do is make some kind of field map. I've done this a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's really nice to do it by hand so you can visualize it, and you can do it in pencil so you can erase things. But I've also started doing it in PowerPoint because I can just move little blocks around. So this I created in PowerPoint. What I really like about this kind of field map is it gives you the spatial orientation and then also the time through the year. So for instance, I've got in field 4, this is a field that I'm doing greens in. And by the way that we organize our fields is we just have 4 100-foot beds to a field. You can do it however you want, but I think it is nice to have like unit blocks of some kind when you're planning, because then as you rotate, you can rotate your crops through those different blocks, and it just helps with planning in a lot of ways. So for instance, in field 4, I've got some things going in late March and early April. So this is where I've got some slightly longer term greens like fennel, celery, carrots, chard, and parsley. You make your block as big as it needs to be for how long that crop is going to be in the field. So part of that is figuring out, you know, the dates to maturity. And then, for instance, with carrots, a lot of times we'll harvest for at least 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. So adding that fudge factor into there as well. But then I can see that I've got a good amount of time even between whenever my fudge factor timing is before I have planned to put the next crops in. And then the lettuce, you can see those blocks are a lot smaller because they're not in the field quite as long. And I've got my succession plantings of lettuce in. I'm going to try to get a fall cover crop in after that. So I really like this method of doing it just to really see, is it possible to fit the things that I plan to plant in the space that I have open to plant? Also, I think starting out, you know, it might have been better. We definitely opened too much space at once and let things get weedy. So I always tell starting farmers to just start off on a smaller space if you can, something that you can manage really well. And even a smaller unit block, like my fields are 100 feet long, but when I was starting out, most crops I didn't need to plant 100 feet of to get what I needed for my shares. So then you have to do things where you're planting different things together and it gets a little bit more complicated. So if you have a smaller block so that you're, you know, planting that whole like 25 feet or 50 feet with one crop, that might make it a little bit easier for turning all those things over at once, and just your management through the season. All right. Okay. So then another thing, if you're just starting CSA, you'll want to think about is how long do you want your season to be, and do you want to offer different kinds of share types? So I think it's always better to start off with a shorter season, something that you know for sure you can deliver on. So a lot of times beginning farmers might just start with a 10 or 12 week season in the main part of the year. The nice thing about that too is if you decide to start short and then you're having a great season, you can always add like a fall option. And I think there's a lot of people, if they've been happy with what you've been doing through the short season, then they'd be happy to, purchase that additional fall option if things are going well and you feel confident in it. Also, I had here, is there a niche for your farm? And that's kind of maybe thinking about seasonality. If there aren't farms doing fall or winter CSAs, maybe you could think about that, although that is kind of a higher level thing for a lot of farmers. So maybe that would be something for later. Most people try to think about whether they're going to have weekly shares and every other week shares. That's really common. Some people also do more than one share size. So we do a single share size, but we offer it either weekly or bi-weekly. And so our bi-weekly shares are our half shares. Honestly, I think that's the simplest way to do it. You can offer two different share sizes, but it's just a headache. We tried to do that one year where we had like a large share and a medium share and then a small share, because there were some people, when we initially started, we did a bigger share size, and there were some people that didn't want that much because, like I said, waste is the biggest complaint of most people. And that was just a headache. So now what we decided to do was just to make our share size smaller, the full share size. But we have a system where we can allow people to add items on to their share. So for those people that do want more, we can do that. But just know that the smallest share sizes are always the most popular. Okay. And then thinking about what you include in your CSA boxes, you want to have obviously a balance of different things. You don't want to give people all zucchinis or, just way too much of a certain thing. I think there are horror stories where people had bad CSA experiences and they just got way too much of a certain thing. So balance, of course, is key. We talked a little bit about the value of your share, planning for that properly and making sure that you are getting, a fair price for what you're producing and not giving people too much, but not giving people too little either. People don't want to feel cheated. So that's a fine line to walk there sometimes with value. But I think what I've
Anna, we've lost your audio again. Can you hear us?
figuring out the sweet spot there.
Hey, Anna.
Yeah.
Your audio just cut out again. So if you could just say the last couple sentences.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Is it okay?
Yeah. We can. It's totally fine now. Thanks.
All right, good. Just talking about value and making sure that you're not giving too much, but also that you're not giving too little, because people, want to feel like they're getting something for their money. So just riding that line between not giving too much, but not giving too little there. Then thinking about, meal planning, having lots of different items that can be used in meals. A lot of times CSAs will do newsletters and give meal ideas, which I think is an excellent idea, especially for those items that people aren't used to using. And they, can have a great idea with a meal, and then they're, things don't go to waste in their share. So that's good. And then I wanted to just make a special point. If you do decide to go with biweekly shares as like a half share option, it's important to think about certain items that you might not give that frequently through the year. making sure both your A week and B week shares get that item at some point. It doesn't always work like that, but if you can, if there's certain kinds of herbs or, you know, things like fennel that people don't want all the time, but just making sure you're not giving it, you know, multiple times to group A and group B never gets it. So kind of keeping track week by week of how that is working, I think it can be important. For your full shares, it's not really an issue. Okay, so now in the last bit here, let's talk a bit about traditional versus customizable shares. So the traditional share is just you as the farmer are choosing which items will be in a share. So it's the you get what you get and you don't get upset model. Definitely the easiest option. And it's what we started with for sure. But then the issue is that it's may only appeal to a limited number of members. Maybe that's good. You know, maybe you want to just cultivate the people, the customers, that this is the good option for them because they like just not having to make any decisions and just getting some exciting food in their box and being able to cook stuff, and they love cooking and they like trying new things, and that's great. And I think if you can cultivate that, you know, that's definitely a way to go. You might just have to do a little bit more, you know, marketing and more like helping with recipes and things like that to make sure that people aren't feeling like stuff is getting wasted. And really just, you know, doing your surveys, making sure people are getting the things that they want to use.
Hey, Anna, we have 5 minutes left and then 10 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. Then there is the customizable share, and that can take a lot of different forms, but it just, you know, means there's some kind of swapping or choosing available. Some farms will do this as some kind of market share situation where people might have like a balance that they can use at the market. Maybe it's something they have to use every week or maybe not. We've never done it because it felt like too much logistical work for us. But some farms do only market shares and it works great for them. So it's something to consider for sure. Because of the customizable share options, it's the one that requires the least planning and messing about. So that can be helpful. You can also have a bin where people can swap items at pickup sites, but then you have to plan ahead to like pack a swap bin. That again could work well for people picking up at market, but if you have people picking up at other places that you're not there, that could be difficult. And then some kind of fully customizable share where people can swap out items ahead of time before you pack shares. And so that's a situation where you might need to have some kind of management software, but may not totally be necessary. I know some people do without that. So what we do on our farm is we do a mix of traditional and customizable shares. And it has worked pretty well for us. I actually thought that after the first year we offered customizable, that everybody would want customizable. But there are a lot of people that still want to do the traditional share. And so it's kind of a weird mix of things to do both. But honestly, like, I think it works well for us, that some people just get the default, some people are able to swap, and we charge more for the customizable share because it takes more logistical planning. And we have used a CSA management software in order to do this efficiently. Which I don't know that I'm really going to have a chance to talk about, but maybe if somebody wants to ask me a question about that, they can send me a message. The other thing, thinking about share pickup and delivery is really key. First, just thinking about what geographic area do you want to serve, because you want to make sure you're not, you know, getting customers from way further away than you want to be going. And then how many days do you want to be harvesting and having pickup days? I think somewhere between 2 and 4 is common, but you could make it happen in 1 if you want to do that. What do you expect from your pickup hosts? Are you going to pack shares in individual crates or boxes or bags? And how's that going to work? Or are you going to do market style pickup? And then thinking about whether you're going to offer home delivery. Obviously, we live in an age where lots of people enjoy getting things delivered to their homes, but that's also a huge amount of time potentially. But if you have a vehicle that would work and you have somebody that would do it.
Anna, it seems like your audio is cut out again.
Is that people just think it doesn't cost anything because everything has free delivery. Well, it costs serious amounts of time. So I was actually surprised. I thought people would be put off by that cost, but there's lots of people that enjoy having the home delivery option. So we have been doing more of that. Honestly, even this year, I'm thinking like I need to charge more for certain like delivery zones. So I'm trying to figure out how to make that work well. And then one thing I like as a metric that I got from Ben Hartman is just this idea that you have to do $100 of produce an hour at least when you are out delivering stuff. So that includes all your CSA shares at pickup sites and your home delivery stuff. So if you're at least doing $100 of produce an hour, you're kind of doing okay with your deliveries. If you're not making that, maybe you need to rethink how you're doing it. And so we initially started delivering shares just in our minivan, which minivans are awesome. I really love them. They're great for carting people and vegetables around. So we used that for a lot of years. And then I think 3 years ago, we got a small cargo van that we now use to deliver shares. And we got these crates we invested in. And people don't take them home. They leave them at pickup sites for us. So we haven't lost too many. So I think that's been working out really pretty well. And we can fit quite a few of them in there actually. So I think that it is 3:20. So should we transition to?
Yeah, let's do some questions. There's a whole long line of them here.
Awesome.
And I think we can still probably fit in some discussion about your CSA management software as well.
Awesome.
Okay, hold on. There. Okay. So we'll just start at the top. Do you include herbs in your shares?
We do. We do mostly annual herbs, so mostly like parsley and basil and cilantro. What else do we do? But we have done some perennial things, and that's something that I think every year, I should really like get something going where I have all of these awesome perennial herbs, and then it just like falls to the bottom of the priority list. But I think that's really great, and people very much appreciate having fresh herbs. They don't want, tons and tons of them usually, but they really do like having that as part of the share. Mm-hmm.
Great. What about green beans? Are those good for CSA boxes? What kind? What are the labor considerations, et cetera?
Yes. So I would file green beans under something that you should grow because people like them, but don't grow so many of them because they take a lot of time to pick. So there's lots of crops like that when you're CSA, everything you're growing isn't the most profitable thing, but you just need to do it because people like them. So that being said, the ones that I really like for CSA are like the flat Italian style green beans because they're super easy to pick compared to other green beans. They're bigger and they have really great flavor. A lot of people want a round green bean, but we've kind of just taught our members to like these ones because they're so much easier to pick.
Totally.
So, yeah.
You just type it in that newsletter and they'll be all over it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Throw in some purple ones or like the dragon tongue ones. Absolutely. People go crazy for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I think when you were discussing broccoli, Daniel chimed in saying you should try broccolini. Have you tried broccolini?
Actually we haven't. Well, is that the same as like broccoli rabe? It's a little different, I think.
It's a little different, yeah.
So we've done something like that a while ago. And I also have like thought, oh, I should put that back on the crop plan, but I don't know. It just like falls down.
The priority list, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Let's see. Do you, a little bit about your seed starting setup. Do you start them in a heated greenhouse, or do you use heat mats or inside? What's that look like?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I didn't put anything in about that. So we start ours, we built a germination chamber to keep them at about the right temperature. So for a couple days, they'll go in there depending on how long their germination time is. And then we actually have a little tent set up in the basement with lights. So it just has 5 shelves and lights. And initially we just started with that until we could put stuff outside in like a cold frame type thing when we first started. Now we have a small greenhouse that we'll take them up to after they've germinated.
And what are you using for your germ chamber?
Oh yeah, it's just its own old refrigerator. And then we just have like actually a fish tank full of water and a bucket heater. And we have it on the temperature controller, and that works great.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
A question from Annie here. She says, hi, Anna.
Hi.
I guess this is Annie Woods, I'm guessing. For things like days to germination or days in flat, are you using info from seed packets and catalogs, or are those numbers you've observed through the season?
Yeah, so a lot of those numbers I initially got just kind of from the seed packets, and then I was tweaking them a little bit depending on what time of year I was planting. And really, you know, I don't think I've gone back and altered those as much as I should based on reality. So some of that stuff isn't like, you know, as tailored to what actually happens as it maybe should be, but yeah.
Yeah. Patrick chimed in here. Thanks, Patrick. He says managing plantings for this size CSA he knows is so important, and it might seem boring, but this record keeping and planning stuff is so important. He's just really celebrating what you're sharing. So I wanted to share that.
Awesome. And that's just make for less stress and anxiety during the season if you feel like you have a good plan and you're not like, what am I doing? Yeah.
Well, just having those formulas in that Excel sheet alone, if you can copy and automatically fill them all the way down, and it's right. Like such a huge time saver. And then they right. automatically adjust if you're like a week late getting something in the ground. It's amazing.
Totally.
So,
totally. Yeah.
So Mackenzie asked, do you include guidance to your members about how to properly store the produce in your shares?
I don't, and that has been a thing that I think in the wintertime, like, oh, I really need to like have this material on our website just as a place where everybody can go. So I don't have to repeat it a whole bunch in newsletters, but just.
Sorry, folks. Anna, your video is frozen again. She'll come back. She always does.
So I think that is, oh, it looks like.
Yeah, you were frozen again. It's okay, just that last bit. If you, what would you like to include to your members about proper storage?
Yes, so I think things like whether or not, you know, greens need to be taken off of roots before you store them, ideally. Just what temperature, and whether you need to store something in like a container or not to keep it from wilting, or a bag or something like that. I think those are really important, and that goes along with, you know, keeping produce from going to waste, or, you know, not getting the best value out of it. So I think that is really important to do, and we haven't quite done that. But then now there are a lot of existing resources that are out there that you can even just link to on your website or in your newsletters that say like, what's the best way to store this item? Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
So yeah, there are some great resources. We're going to link to some now, and someone already just beat us to it. They threw the UK Food Connection, the food hub that the seasonal food hub that they put together. Some great resources in there. At Oak, we have the Kentucky Farm Share Coalition, which is a workplace wellness CSA program and sort of the works to elevate CSA across the state. And so we've been working in the past year on a lot of crop profiles and recipe profiles and storage profiles. And so we can drop some of those links into the chat too. And then there are all these great groups, like you mentioned, the Fair Share Coalition up in Madison. They do incredible CSA work, and they have the CSA Innovation Network, and they're sort of like working with CSA networks across the nation to organize and to share resources and to share branding resources. And CSA Week is February 22nd to 26th. It's a whole week now, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great resources that are specifically focused at capturing that customer audience, right? And hyping CSA to them in real ways. So, so we got a lot of those resources in there in the chat. Great. The other thing I wanted to say, we can take 1 or 2 more minutes. There is a virtual, the second Kentucky Proud virtual CSA that we're partnering with KDA on, and the table, and the Kentucky Horticulture Council and Edible Magazine. And so any farmers here that have a CSA program that aren't yet participating in that event, definitely be sure to reach out and contact. You can send me an email, brooke@oak-ky.org, and we'll send you the link for information if we can't get it in the chat in time before we hop off. And there's also, oh yeah, there's the CSA Innovation Network is hosting Ideas Lab webinar next week, and the links in the chat there also for your consideration. So lots of great CSA resources. Okay, we have a couple more questions for you though, Anna. Sorry. Kelsey's wondering, how much do you charge for home delivery?
So we are charging about $4 this year for delivery.
Okay.
I still think that barely covers like the cost of it a lot of times. So, yeah. Yeah.
And I guess just quickly on the way out, what is the software you're using for customization and for CSA?
We are using Farmigo software. I didn't get to those slides, but if you look at the PDF of the presentation, it'll be in there. So I think it's the Wild West right now for softwares, farm softwares for all sorts of things. And so that can be a little bit intimidating. And I would say for anybody beginning, you should just start with traditional. But if you're looking into something else, I don't know. I mean, Farmigo has worked for us, but I think nothing is going to be like the perfect fit for any farm. So it's just, looking at the costs, like, will it, will it provide you enough value for how much you're paying for it? And for us, it does seem to work, and our member retention has been much better since we implemented it. And there's all sorts of little efficiencies. But I definitely think just start off in CSA, to begin with before jumping into something like that.
And I just tried to look for it quickly. Yeah. I didn't find it, but the CSA Innovation Network has a great link that profiles all the different CSA softwares. It does like a side-by-side comparison. So anyone that is like interested in looking for that, I know it's a resource on the CSA Innovation Network. I just can't grab it and moderate at the same time. So keep a lookout for that if we can get it in the chat in time. Otherwise, do a little Google search there. Okay, Anna, that was the end of our questions, unless I missed something. The one thing that I do want to highlight, though, before we part is that we're partnering with you on a field day this year, which is so exciting.
Yeah.
So we're partnering on a virtual field day, tools for minimal till market farming and diversified vegetables. And so that'll be in July. So we'll be on the farm getting some footage, but that will be a virtual event in July. wouldn't it be great if we could be in person by then? But these things take like 3 months to plan for us. So it's got to be virtual at this point. But to be sure to tune in for that, and you can see Anna's farm in person or virtually. We can see more video footage of it. So, and Anna's email is there in the chat for anyone that wants to follow up with her directly. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thanks for sharing all the details with us.
You are welcome, and thanks everyone for coming and being a part of this. I really appreciate it.